the right decisions bring about the right results. And when I say the right results, we all have goals, we all have things that we want to achieve. And we consider ourselves successful, and we enjoy the happiness that we have succeeded when we achieve our goals, when we achieve the purpose that we set out to achieve. And we all realize, our rational minds tell us that if we make the right decisions, we will get the right results. But the question is, how do we end up making the right decisions? What is the key to making the right decisions? The key to the right decisions is having the right information. If we get the right information too late, we miss our opportunities, or else we fail to take evasive action in the face of threats and in the face of harmful or detrimental circumstances. So either way, the right information coming too late, in other words, if it is not timely, it results in opportunities being foregone, and it results in detrimental circumstances coming and hitting us, and our being unable to take evasive action. On the other hand, information may come at the right time, but if the information that does reach us is actually incomprehensible, then it is more likely a mass of data and not really information. Because you see, information is supposed to be processed data which can be used for proper decision making. So I frankly don't believe in such a thing as information overload, because if there is an overload, we're not dealing with information, we're dealing with data. So we have numerous issues. We have issues of information coming to us too late. We have issues of too much data being presented, and that robs us of focus. It takes away clarity. It ends up in important things being missed, or else it ends up in too much attention being drawn to nitty-gritty, to petty things, to trivialities. Now, having said that, my concern today and my purpose is to give you some sort of perspective in this first video on financial information and what ultimately leads to good, sound financial decisions. Right at the outset, I must highlight a key factor of business. If we go back to the origins of business, they date right back to the origins of civilization. In civilized society, we find that people began to specialize in certain things. Although we've been taught historically that there was a pastoral age and there was an agricultural age, we find that in civilization, pastoral care or looking after animals, animal husbandry, coexisted side by side with agricultural activities. It coexisted with cultivation, and with the cultivation of corn, the cultivation of rice, staple diets, and many other types of things that we consume as food. So in reality, what happened was people realized that their land, the land which they claimed as their own, was more conducive to a particular type of crop than for some other crop. And so what they did was they began to plow and sow a particular type of item, be it vegetables, a certain type of grain, whatever it may be. Others decided that their land was more conducive to being used for pasture, or more conducive to being used for poultry. And so they began to engage in animal husbandry. And thus, in this specialization, people ended up producing more than they actually needed for their families and their household units. So the person who was engaged in poultry and in the care of fowl ended up with more eggs than he or his family could possibly use. On the other hand, the person who had cultivated rice, or who was growing wheat or growing maize, had a surplus. He had much more at the end of harvest than he or his family could possibly use, even if that grain were preserved for months. So what happened? We ended up in a system of exchange. We ended up with people coming to a common place where someone who had a surplus of wheat exchanged it for a surplus of vegetables which somebody else had. That was the beginning of business. And although so much has changed in the centuries that have passed, although much water has flown beneath the bridge, the core principle of business is still this. I will have sales only if I satisfy somebody else's need. I will have sales and I will make some income only if I satisfy somebody else's need. Conversely, the other person will have a sale only if he was offering or providing something that satisfied my need. So it is in the mutual satisfaction of needs that business becomes possible and that business becomes sustainable. It's a very simple principle. None of us would pay for a shoe which we cannot wear. If the shoe doesn't fit, if it's too big for your feet, the pair of shoes is too big for your feet or too little for your feet, you're not going to buy it simply because it doesn't fit. Having said that, we understand that for business to be successful, for a business venture to actually survive, let alone thrive, that business must first and foremost recognize the needs of the people it strives to serve. And having recognized that need, if what the business produces, or if what the business generates is something that satisfies the other person's need, then we know that business will have sales. While this is so obvious, it is the most misunderstood concept in the world. People understand it rationally. When you talk about it and say, look, if you don't give people what they want, they're not going to come back to you. They're not going to buy what's available in your shop. They're not going to buy what your factory is producing. People nod their heads and they acknowledge this in their rational minds. But in people's subconscious minds, they have their own hang-ups. They are so convinced that what they're doing is right and that what they're producing is best for the customer, that the customer doesn't know what he wants and doesn't know what she wants. And people continue to do stuff like that. So we realize that where there is a mismatch, between what a business offers and what the customer needs, there will be no sale. This mismatch is at the core of poor management. See, wherever you have a mismatch, wherever there's a lack of balance, what's the key to a balance? From time immemorial we have seen in business, in the marketplace, long before digital scales came along, they had a set of balances. And what would they do? They would place a weight on one side of the balance and they would place the food item on the other side of the balance. And at whatever point these two happen to more or less balance, that is the point where the customer is satisfied that he is getting what he expected and what he is paying for. And the sale goes through. See, a false balance is not good. A false balance is unwholesome. And while we understand that a false balance in life, a poor balance between work and rest, a poor balance between work and play, a poor balance between committing time to the corporate world and committing time to one's family. We crow about these things. We speak about Christmas being a time for the family. We think about family coming first. And we speak about these things, but that's all humbug. We're great at preaching and so poor at practicing. So the core of what I want to leave with you before we proceed to the remainder of the videos that I have planned is this. If you don't get your balance right, if there is a mismatch in your business, if there is a mismatch in your organization, rest assured, it will fail. You can forget about thriving. As a matter of fact, you don't even have chances of surviving if your business fails to achieve this simple principle. first and foremost, of matching what it gives to matching what the customer wants. Then, of course, we know, why do people start businesses? People start businesses because they want to end up happier. They want to end up in a better place once they start the business than where they were before they started the business. If not, there's no reason to start a business. So traditionally, businesses have been started for the purpose of increasing the founder's wealth, or for the purpose of increasing the wealth of the person who started the venture. Now, we understand that if someone wants to increase their wealth, obviously money is an important part of this. Now, here's where I come to the crux of our matter. The word finance stems from a French word, which in turn had a Latin root. And that Latin root suggested finishing something, bringing it to completion. So, when we speak of finance itself, finance is all about completing, settling one's debts, settling one's obligations. So business is about mutual satisfaction of needs. Meaning, if you start a business, the customer's needs must be satisfied and the needs of the business must also be satisfied. But when we speak of finance in particular, the heart of proper financial management is the ability to meet one's financial obligations. In other words, if salaries are due on a particular date at the end of the month, those salaries have to be paid at the end of the month. If a supplier has to be paid on a particular date, whether he has given 30 days credit or 45 days credit or whatever, just paying that supplier on the date that you promise to pay him and on the date that he expects, that is good, sound financial management. If you've got a mortgage, paying up that mortgage amount, paying up that installment on the due date, that is sound financial management. If you've taken a vehicle on lease, paying that lease installment on the due date, that is sound financial management. So you see, financial management, the heart of financial management, the goal that we are trying to achieve in proper financial management is making sure that whoever has to be paid and whatever has to be paid is paid on the right date, or if there is a time bar, at least at the right time. How are you going to pay people their salaries on the right day? How are you going to pay your lease installment or pay your mortgage on the day that it is due? You've got to make sure that A, you have the money in hand prior to the due date. Or push comes to shove, you've got to make sure that whoever is supposed to pay you for whatever you've done for them before, pays you prior to the date when you have an obligation to pay the people who are expecting money from you. Whether that happens to be a bank, a leasing company, a supplier, an employee, or whoever it may be. So, if we get the timing wrong, if we have a mismatch between the due date of our payments or between the due dates of our payments and the receipt of the cash that we ought to get from customers or the cash that we ought to get from some other source, whether it's rent, dividends, I cannot, what the exact source may be. If we don't ensure a proper match, a proper balance between the timing of receipts and the timing of payments, that is the foundation for financial collapse. That is the foundation for financial crises. First and foremost, there are businesses which don't have sales. And the lack of sales wrecks them financially, because if you don't have sales, there will ultimately be no money coming in. And while there is no money coming in, most costs in most organizations are fixed. Meaning you've got to pay your staff their salary whether you had sales or didn't have sales. You've got to pay your rent whether you produced in the factory or didn't produce in the factory. You've got to settle your mortgage whether you had income, whether you had work during that month or didn't have work in that month. If you happen to have sufficient hires for your car which you have taken on lease, well and good. If you haven't had sufficient hires, that's not the problem of the company that leased out the vehicle to you. You've got to pay them on the due date, regardless of whether you have had sales or not, regardless of whether you have had income or not. So if we mess up in the area of sales, how will we do that? If we fail to understand what the customer wants, if we fail to offer and provide what the customer truly requires, we're going to have a drop in sales. If we mess up in customer service, we're going to have a drop in sales. If we have a drop in sales, that will hit you financially because your cash inflow is going to be busted. And all the outflows on their due dates, the bank's going to call you, the leasing company is going to call you, the supplier is going to call you. All those who are expecting money will call you without fail and knock on your door without fail. So your obligations stay put. But if you mess up with sales, your cash coming in, that is what will get busted. Adding to that, suppose we have sufficient sales, but if we happen to be a B2B business, in other words, where the customer happens to be a business by itself, and we're not really selling to the final consumer. In circumstances like that, in B2B relationships, your customer is going to expect credit from you. He's not going to pay you cash up front. He will expect 30 days credit, maybe 60 days credit, I don't know. Now what happens is you may have sales. As far as your sales records are concerned, as far as your income statement is concerned, you will show sales. But if you don't get money from your customers, if your receivables don't land in your cash till, if they don't come to your account on time, you're going to have a problem. That is the mismatch between credit sales, which don't generate cash, and expenses or payments, which you have to make in cash. So if you have sales on paper, if you have satisfied customer orders, if you have delivered on time, and you have adequate sales for the month, or adequate sales for the prior month or the previous month, but if you don't collect the cash prior to the due dates of your various payments, you're going to be fried. You're going to be in big trouble. I will elaborate more on these areas, on this mismatch, in the videos that follow. I'm going to be talking about the mismatch between fixed costs, which in many businesses form the bulk of their cost structure. I'm going to talk about variable costs and fixed costs. I'm going to talk about how many businesses have sales which are in fact seasonal. And we will talk about that mismatch and what can be done to bridge or minimize that mismatch. In a subsequent video, I'm going to be talking about breaking even, what it means to break even, and how you can simply compute or estimate the volume of sales that you would need to break even. And then again, I will speak of short-term cash flow management. I will speak of managing your debtors and managing your creditors. In another video, I will speak of just-in-time, of that whole management philosophy and what it means to properly manage your inventory and why it is important not to produce too much and not to produce too early and not to buy too much and not to buy too early. What does all that mean? How will it impact your purse? And finally, we will talk about the peril of borrowing and borrowing excessively, particularly if people borrow for the purpose of consumption rather than borrowing for the purpose of investment. So stay with me in the videos that follow. This is the introduction, and I have titled this The Peril of Mismatch, or the Peril of a False Balance. I hope you've benefited from the last 15 to 20 minutes that you have seen and heard me, and that I have given you food for thought, that I have channeled your thinking into a new direction where you would be more aware, where you would be more cautious in the decisions you make and in the type of information that you seek to make those decisions. All the best to you.